This is a tricky subject, so let's begin with matter. I'm sure most are familiar with quantum physics. These are observations of electrons and atoms in relation to our physical experience, or the now, as some may call it. Most would think matter is affected by time. However, I have reason to believe otherwise. My best example are rocks. Architects can only date objects from the sediment and local rocks around it. The true age of the rock remains a mystery. Why is that, you may ask? They don't have a reference point for objects that old. Civilizations can be dated by their cultures, but nature may as well be undatable from their point of reference. With that established, time being maintained or projected by matter becomes a reasonable hypothesis. After all, we know as much about time as we know about rocks. We just know it affects us subjectively. Time as an objective force becomes relative due to subjectivity. After all, what is time without matter? Without something to be timed, time becomes expendable. From an objective reference, at least. If you if you take away time from a subjective point of view, things quickly um, begin to lose their frame of reference. So you start doing things like creating the past from the future or vice versa. In the previous lesson, I shared that I suspect the circle of being one of closest shapes to being godly. I'll now explain why. Magnetism in a circle is called matter in physics, which makes sense. Using Earth as an example, everything inside it is magnetized. Now that established, let's look at a hypersphere or a fourth dimensional sphere. This is a sphere with one or more dimension than a three-dimensional one. And that extra dimension is still relative to the lower dimensions, although it may not be measurable without a reference point. To put it simply, the matter inside the earth in this example, the matter inside the sphere would be earth, and that can be used to calculate the higher dimensions of the sphere. And with that being said, the equation using the components above will create an equation, and the that equation, which is coming up, shows what it would take to measure the diameter of one hypersphere from inside of itself. Meaning, one person could feasibly measure the whole hypersphere while still being contained in the hypersphere. Um, and one good question I asked, why do we always use a form of math to solve otherwise metaphysical equations? And it's because we've been conditioned to do so. Not only that, reality itself, um, really requires of us to have at least some sort of mathematical proficiency. And to move on, um, imagine trying to measure a spirit metaphysically. You know, to do such, you wouldn't be using like numbers. You would have to become the spirit. You would have to use uh, a measurement outside of logic or intelligence. For example, imagination. You could imagine that you are the spirit. So imagine our universe is a sphere. If matter means magnetism and light means energy, as an example, then our universe would be expanding using a combination of the two. There's a theory that the universe expands in waves, with all dimensions overlapping each other from an objective frame of reference. So everything in the universe will be magnetized to certain frequencies, while the rest of the universal sphere expands in wave patterns. So, okay, we've delved enough into matter. Now let's cover the mind and the key to mind over matter. The mind is told to be the most powerful thing in the universe. Is it because it can do simple equations and run the body? In basic terms, yes. But we know there's more to it, being a complex conscious being as well as a spiritual one. Meaning, even if you master the physical, without the metaphysical, you can't really grasp all there is to grasp. If you know everything, then you know that everything is always changing. There, oh, excuse me. So knowing everything becomes knowing how to learn. Here is why here is where I can give definite answers based off experience. Most of you may have already saw my telekinesis video. In it, I use water and heat to move objects inside the pot. Though it's only a matter example, it taught me to use mind over matter. What I learned was that objects inside what what I learned was that abilities like psychokinesis are very difficult at our current density. Going back to my telekinesis video, the object is on the water, which although isn't less dense than air, provides a conduit for my thoughts, especially when heated. The heat charge the molecules in the water, making it easier to move the object. I'm able to move objects on cold water only if it's a large body. I've deduced it's because the more water there is, the easier it is for the water to pick up the thoughts. Why does this matter? Well, before using psychokinesis, wouldn't you need to have at least some knowledge of telekinesis? I'm only sharing this to expand your minds on the subject. In a basic sense, my telekinesis demonstration is alchemy. Instead of making something I created the conditions needed to perform a feat.